like a ghost in my life, but still I had cried.
And welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Very, very much appreciated. Seems like there's a lot of love out there for Dutch whiskey, more love than there is for the Dutch entry into last night's Eurovision Song Contest. Yeah, we're not going to kind of go there. We'll stick to the whiskey. So yes, Millstone whiskey, absolutely wonderful, and lots of lovely comments. So very, very much appreciated. Right, so as today, it's a lovely sunny day here in Nottingham, so I'm shutting myself away in the study and I'm tasting peated whiskey. Why not? So as you can see from the title page, we're looking at Longrow. It's my yearly Springabnk episode of the show. So a big thank you to my good friend in Sunderland and Richard Hall for the samples for today's episode of the show. Both of them kind of gave me a sample of the open day bottling, so really very, very much appreciated. So yeah, peated whiskey, middle of summer. Well, not quite the middle of summer, but almost. Why not? I mean, I don't subscribe to this kind of you should only be drinking peated malts in the winter time because you're sat by the fire and smoking a big cigar and all this kind of stuff. I mean, how many of us kind of live off grid in a bothy or in a 15th century farmhouse? Not very many. We all kind of like have relatively modern houses with central heating, so we don't have open fires and all that. And well, you know what? If I want some peat, if I feel the need for peat, then I have to sort of feed that need, as they say. So anyway, yes, I kind of like a bit of peat every now and again. I thought, well, I haven't done a Longrow episode of the show for quite some time. I think the last Springabnk episode I did was actually Springabnk, or might have been Kilkerran possibly. I forget. I do so many episodes of the show these days. But anyway, so do I need an episode? Do I need an excuse to do a Longrow episode of the show? No, I don't think I do, and I don't really need to sort of go into any great detail about Springabnk because, well, A, you know it all, and B, well, I've done countless episodes of the show over the last 10 years on Springabnk, so we're just going to take a look at today's lineup.
You are so near to me.
So, as I said, a big thank you to both Richard and Ian for the samples for today's episode of the show. So it's a bit of an eclectic mix, I guess. We're going to kick off with the oldest bottling of Longrow that I've got here today. This is the online tasting week, 17-year-old. It was a fresh rum cask. It was bottled at 50.5%, bottled in 2021. Then we're going to move on to two Longrow Red bottlings, the first of which was the 2022 bottling. This was 11 years old, 57.5%. It spent 7 years in ex-bourbon before being finished for 4 years in ex-tawny port casks. The second Longrow Red is the Cabernet Franc. So 9 years in bourbon, 2 years finishing in ex-Cabernet Franc casks. This was bottled in 2017 at 55.9%. Right, look at the colour of that. If there's ever been a whiskey that has the colour of old engine oil, queued up possibly, there's one that springs to mind. I haven't seen very many. I mean, it's either old engine oil or old olive oil, or maybe a mixture of both possibly, but this is the limited edition 14-year-old sherry cask, which are, what God's name was that sherry cask? I mean, 57.8%. Apparently refill Oloroso. I mean, dear God, if that was first fill Oloroso, I wouldn't have even expected quite that kind of murky colour, shall we say. It was distilled in September of 2003, bottled in July of 2018. So, yeah, that's going to be fun, isn't it? Then we're going to move on to this one, the May 2023 Open Day bottling. This was an 8-year-old, bottled at 54.9%, and was aged in ex-Oloroso cask. So, look, you know, okay, difference in colour? Yeah, okay. So we'll see. And the final bottling of the afternoon is one of those wonderful wood expressions from way back. early 2000s. I think this was bottled in 2005. So this was the 10-year-old Tokaji wood expression, distilled in February 1995, bottled in August of 2005, 10 years old, 58.6%. And I'll tell you what, the colour of that is marginally closer to the old engine oil colour than it is to any sort of Tokaji finished I've ever come across. But anyway, I think this is going to make for an interesting, yeah, you're waiting for me to get to this one, aren't you? Well, you'll have to wait, because we've got 3 others we have to get through first. So without much further ado, let's kick off with the rum cask.
Do you please become real for me?
Right, okay, so 17-year-old fresh rum cask. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Very rummy. I mean, it's got that lovely high-toned dried fruit, quite oily, lots of rummy notes, quite subtle peat. It's earthy peat. There's a sort of quite gentle sweetness there as well, sort of a little bit of barley, some almost kind of lime marmalade, lime conserve, a little bit of salt. There's a slight sort of coastal astringency that's just starting to come through now. A little bit of butteriness as well. I mean, that's a lovely nose. I mean, that really has worked absolutely beautifully. That is wonderfully balanced. It's not too rummy, but there's plenty of rum notes there. There's a nice level of peat. It's not a huge peat monster. It's balanced. I think it's really nicely balanced. Let's see what the palate's like. Full, weighty, oily. Again, quite rummy to start off with, getting that oily sort of rummy dried fruit. A little bit of sugar cane as well kind of coming through. Menthol, peat, a little bit of tar, a little bit of salt, a little bit of coastal astringency. Lovely tingling sort of coastal salty finish and aftertaste. A little bit of bog myrtle. The dried rummy fruit kind of runs out of steam a little bit onto the finish. I don't really think it needs any water. And actually I'm not going to bother putting any water. I've got far too many of the other ones that will probably need it. I think sort of it's just got a lovely mouthfeel, lovely complexity, lovely depth, lovely balance, lovely whiskey.
You are not afraid, this I know.
Right, okay, so on to the first of the 2 reds. So this is the tawny port finish. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Very porty. Lots of red black fruit, menthol, eucalyptus, coffee, mocha, slightly more astringent peat, a little bit of a coastalness. Again, nicely balanced. I mean, you know, it's not, you know, it's kind of peat and wine. It's but there's a bit more going on there. You know, there is that lovely sort of mentholated sort of eucalyptus creosote kind of note happening. The port is pretty heavy, it has to be said, but you know, it's just about there, I think. Let's see what the palate's like. More tawny port on the palate, still quite porty, dried fruits, tawny dried fruits, slightly more red fruits than black fruits, but there is a little bit of black fruit there. Astringent peat, capsicum, green pepper finish, quite intense, slightly masked, very salty aftertaste. The peat is a little buried, I will give you that. I can taste that sort of earthy astringency, but it's a little bit sort of OTT on the port. I'm going to put a little drop of water and see whether that knocks back some of the port a little bit. It's Probably a little bit more chocolatey, possibly. It really hasn't lessened the port intensity. The port cask is basically not giving up here. It's maybe a bit softer, a bit more sweeter, possibly. It's okay. It's pleasant. It's probably not quite as balanced as, say, the rum, but still, you know, it's still a nice chocolatey nose. Let's see what the pal's like now. Thicker, oilier, sweeter, more port, less peat, less complexity, longer, nice earthy, green peppery kind of finish. Yeah, it's all right. I mean, it's, you know, it's not one of the great Longrow Reds, it has to be said. It's interesting. It's possibly a little bit too heavy on the port. But you know, overall, you know, you can't complain about the quality.
Why do I see your wild charm and don't see the house?
Right, okay, so let's move on to the Cabernet Franc. Let's see what the nose gives on this end, shall we? Oh, right, now that's got a better balance. So intense, salty, again, green peppery, herbal peat. A little bit of wininess kind of coming through, a little bit of black fruit, smoky herbs, mentholated herbs, manure, vanilla, a little bit more fish oils, more spirit character, better balanced, I think, in this instance. Lovely barleyed sweetness as well. It's reminding me a little bit of the sort of the expectations of Octomore. You kind of think of Octomore as just this, you know, peat behemoth, but you actually do get some nuance. Admittedly, the nuances within the peat, but you do get some barley character coming through. And this kind of like just has me in sort of mind of that. It even though the peat is quite prominent and quite noticeable, there is still some sweetness from the barley. There's still some spirit character. And this, for me, is a far better balanced Longrow Red. Let's see what the pal's like. Oh, that's a great finish. So again, quite astringent, quite peated, quite herbal peat, manure, gritty tannins, quite tight, kind of typically French tight tannins, licorice, malt, not so much barley kind of coming through on here. It's more about the sort of the malt and the peat with a little bit of a wininess, a little bit of sort of black fruit kind of happening there in the background. The spirit feels far less compressed, if you like, and maybe that's because it was only 2 years in the Cab Franc, whereas the it was 4 years in the Tawny Port. Maybe the Cabernet Franc casks weren't quite as active. It's got a lovely aftertaste. Keeps going and going and getting this sort of like peat and tobacco leaf and earth and a little bit of fish oil. That's bloody good, it has to be said. And that's what I want from a whiskey. You know, I want the complexity, I want sort of balance. I know I bang on and on and on about balance, but sometimes you just get whiskies that aren't particularly balanced. And but this is probably a little bit more winey now, a little bit more smokier. There's a little bit of syrup coming out now. Less peat, bit more vanilla, a bit more American oak. Sweeter nose. I mean, I like it. I like it neat, and I like it with water. It's changed, but it hasn't changed to the sort of detriment. There is possibly, like I said, a little bit more oak character, both American and French. But and the peat has lessened a bit. It's a bit more smokier than sort of overtly peated. But it's kind of like, you know, either way, it's a really good nose, really intriguing nose. Let's see what the pass on it. Again, a touch more of the cask, a little bit more of the sweeter black fruits, a little bit less peat. Still quite herbal, still quite almost medicinal, still quite astringent, but that softness and that sort of slightly more kind of oily, sort of winey, malty fruit is kind of coating the tongue and the palate. There's a little bit of a grittiness on the finish, a little bit of tannin. Overall, I really like that. I thought that was beautifully balanced. I think personally I preferred that without water, but I think with water I think it's still equally as well balanced, although I think the balance is better without the water. So yeah, I think overall that is a really, really good whiskey.
Baby, I cry to you, please become
Okay, deep breath time. Old engine oil. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Oh my word. How am I going to describe this? Gritty, coffeed, intense, old Oloroso. It smells old. I mean, and I don't mean the spirit. I mean, the spirit's 14. I can't smell any spirit, to be bluntly honest with you. I just smell old wood. Not shagged wood, old wood. Olives, green olives, tapenade, earth. Do I get any peat? Nah, not really. Do I get lots of sherry? Yes. Do I get Campbelltown funk? No. I just get old sherry. I mean, it just stinks of old sherry. And, you know, it's got that kind of balsamic, sort of vinegary kind of note. So maybe one or two of these casks were less than pristinely clean. Yeah, I can imagine there's a number of you that kind of wet yourself over this, but for me it really is frankly quite one-dimensional. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Again, old wood, old sherry, gritty, coffeed, tannic, licorice, no peat, no spirit character. You know, if you didn't tell me that was longer, I would be hard pushed to get it. All right, a little bit of earthiness on the finish, a little bit of fishiness possibly, but it's all old sherry, old wood, and it's just not very exciting whatsoever. Yeah, let's stick some water with it. I mean, let's put it this way. It ain't gonna kill it, is it? It ain't gonna make it any. Well, I was just about to say, it ain't gonna make it any worse than what it actually is. It's not bad. You know, I mean, yeah, all right. There was a slight sort of off note there on the nose, but sweeter possibly. Any real change? Yeah, no. We're still sort of like sherry and more sherry and old old treacle. Yeah, it's possibly emphasising that slight off note as well. Green olives, I mean, yeah, let's see what the palate's like. Yeah, astringent, old sherry, full stop. Oh, I just got a little bit of peat there. Sort of peated licorice just suddenly sort of popped up on the finish. Well, blow me.
Oh yeah, you saved my ass.
Okay, so let's move on to the 8-year-old Open Day, May 2023. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Ooh, that's young and intense and rubbery. Red licorice, latex, more rubber, more peat, mentholated. Oh, little soapy possibly. Pears soap I get. I mean, that's, where the hell does that come from? I mean, yeah, I remember pear soap as a kid. I remember sort of staying over with my grandmother, and she would always have a bar of pears soap. I mean, it's just one of those kind of memories and those smells that's just etched into my brain. And I can smell it here. It's just got that. Yeah, just go and buy a. I think you can still buy it, you know, and you know, experience pear soap. Oh, it's just wild. It's woolly. There's lots of peat. There's a fair amount of sherry. It's astringent. It's salty. It's great fun. There's burnt wood, fish oils. I mean, it is just Longrow. It just screams Longrow to me. I mean, you know, if I was tasting this blind, I think I would probably have nailed it. Well, I wouldn't have maybe nailed the bottling, but I would have probably nailed it. It was Longrow and sub 10 years old. I mean, it's just great. It's just what Longrow is all about, and it works so nicely when it's kind of handled like this. Let's see what has that. Dense, chewy, more sherry, more raisinated fruits, quite astringent, quite salty, but quite full and oily and fishy, tarry, licorice, lovely astringent peat. I mean, it is a big mouthful. It's intense, it's young, it's not too young though. Oh, that salt is kind of like just almost crystallizing on my tongue. And the intensity of, and the alcohol and the salt is going to also sucking the moisture out of my mouth. It is great. It's wonderful. I love this bottling. It's possibly a little bit accented towards the cask end of the spectrum, but well, you know, I mean, that's a hell of a whiskey, it has to be said. And we'll put a little drop of water with it, although really you probably don't really need to, because you're just going to lessen the intensity. Yeah, a little bit more sort of green nuts, less kind of intense, less rubbery, less peaty, but you know, it's a little bit softer, it's a little bit more laid back. It's still got some of that lovely astringency, a bit more smoky now possibly. Yeah, certainly more of the astringent sort of green nuts, sherry notes. Let's see what that. Fuller, maltier, richer, softer, less fun, it has to be said, but still quite intense. But that intensity is kind of softened, shall we say. It's kind of again, I'm getting probably more of that kind of green nuts kind of sherry notes, as opposed to the overt sort of dried Oloroso kind of fruit notes. A bit more herbal peat possibly on the aftertaste, a little bit of sort of burnt wood, you know, burnt green wood. I mean, that's a lovely whiskey at the end of the day. I personally, neat, absolutely wonderful. Love the intensity. Don't think it really needed water, although it certainly didn't do any harm. Yeah, love that. Right, okay, so on to the final whiskey of the afternoon. This is the 10-year-old Tokaji wood expression. Let's see what the nose goes. It gives us on this end, shall we? Oh my God! I feel like Jerry Clarkson then. Sulphur City. I mean, Jesus. Yeah. The thing is that there was, these were a number of bottlings that were done around about the same sort of time, and there was the infamous Longrow Gaia Barolo finish that you may well remember. It was butyric as hell, baby sick and peat, and this is sulphur and peat. I mean, it's, the problem of course lies within the casks themselves. Now, obviously, you have sweet wine casks. A lot of sweet wine is has either the fermentation arrested by the use of alcohol, or, as in the case of Tokaji, it generally tends to be that the yeast dies well before it's eaten all the sugar. So inherently you have a cask that is just, you know, screaming for bacteria. I mean, you know, and to say this has been bacterially compromised, I think is kind of a bit of an understatement. Green wood, green peat, green tar, capsicum, vinegar, olive oil, burnt toffee, coffee. I mean, you know, I know there's a lot of you that love your Springabnk dirty, but sure, I think you're going to kind of struggle with this one. I mean, there's dirty and there's dirty. I mean, this is not kind of earthy dirty, this is kind of bacterially dirty. It's a mad. I mean, you know, I remember tasting the Barolo finish, and it was just sort of like, what the hell am I tasting? It was like a slow motion car crash. I mean, it was just something you just could not sort of like, you know, you just couldn't stop smelling it. It was just kind of like, I have never smelt anything quite like it. And I think I'm almost right saying that I've never quite smelled anything quite like this as well. I mean, yeah. Yeah, let's see what the pal's like. Bitter, herbal, sulphoured, green wood, capsicum, green pepper. Where's the sweetness of the Tokaji? I mean, there isn't any, none whatsoever. It's just this sulphury mess, and I guess this is a part of the problem, is that, you know, you buy these wine casks, you buy, and you there's no way of testing them. You can't do a kind of like, you know, you can't just basically stick your finger in and sort of wiggle it around and go, oh yeah, I can taste the bacteria there. You haven't got a clue, and the only time you know it is when you actually sort of like literally draw a sample out of it. And but I mean, the point being is somebody sampled this, you know, and somebody said this was great to bottle. Somebody was having a bloody laugh, it has to be said, or maybe they would. Maybe they just had just had a bit of an evil week. What was it, with Frank Hardy or whoever? You know, God only knows. I mean, I'll put some water with it. I don't think it's actually going to make an iota of difference to this particular bottling at all. If anything, it's bloody well emphasised the sulphur and the green wood and the green fruit and the greenness of it all. I mean, it's just, I mean, I don't get any peat now. The peat has just gone, whoa, I've given up. And it's just, it is a car crash, an absolute bloody car crash. That's the palate's right. Okay, it's sulphured, it's green, yeah, okay, we've got all of that. I don't need to kind of go through that bit again. There is a bit of sweetness there coming out now. I mean, I can almost taste kind of botrysized kind of grape. No, it really was, it's still, even then, it's still a bloody car crash. It is still, you know, something that you would kind of like, you know, if you're into a bit of sort of self-flagellation, then yep, that's your whiskey for you, it has to be said. But for me, oh, that's just sort of like too bacterially compromised. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Well, I think that there's one thing you can say about Longrow, is that it's a hell of a lot of fun at the end of the day, and you know, you can't argue with that. The rum cask finish, or fresh rum finish, or maybe it's wholly aged in rum, I failed to look that one up. I mean, that was great. I mean, I loved that. I mean, I love rum anyway, and the balance was really nice. I mean, yes, it was quite accented towards the rum, but I got enough spirit character and enough peat to sort of like say, yeah, this is really intriguing. I really like that. The Tawny Port Longrow Red, suffered from possibly being finished for a little bit too long in the port casks. A little bit too much of that, not enough spirit character, you know. Whereas the Cab Franc Longrow Red was just absolutely spot on. That if you're going to do a wine finish, that's how you do it. Judicious use of the wine cask, shall we say. Kept the balance absolutely spot on. 14-year-old sherry cask? Well, indeed. A sherry cask, an old sherry cask, several old sherry casks, several old shagged out old sherry casks. No. You know, it is what it is. I mean, you know, you can just look at the colour. I mean, to kind of get an impression of where you were going to be with that. Arguably, I think it's a toss-up between the rum cask and the online tasting, not the online, the open day bottling, as to I think the bottling of the day. It has to be said. I mean, that just encapsulated Longrow for me. That lovely, intense, earthy, sort of gritty, peaty kind of character, and a balanced use of sherry. I mean, yeah, that really worked amazingly well. On the other hand, you know, the Tokaji cask, you just get the feeling that basically it was a case of, well, we bought these bloody casks, we're going to have to do something with them now. You know, sense would have said sold them off to somebody to bottle on, you know, under their own label, rather than sort of bottle them yourself. But you know, that's the thing with Springabnk. They've never kind of sort of shied away from bottling compromised stuff. I mean, I will, hand on heart, I will say that the sort of, there's less, you seem to get less of this kind of weird stuff these days. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. You kind of make your mind up with that. Personally, I think it just seems to me that maybe the wood policy is a little bit tighter, a little bit better than what it was, you know, 10, 12 years ago. Well, actually more than that, really, almost 20 odd years ago. And so it should be, really, at the end of the day. There should be no excuse now for sort of like, you know, tainted casks and all that kind of stuff. Yes, they do still crop up, but certainly less so than 20 odd years ago. But yeah, it makes these kind of tastings a hell of a lot of fun, it has to be said. But anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. You know, feel free to comment, you know, all that kind of stuff. But until next week, good dramming and good afternoon.